Clayton Reeves stood on his porch, watching 3 white vans roll down his dirt road like they owned the place. The vehicles moved in perfect formation, too coordinated for a coincidence. Each van bore identical logos he couldn't make out from this distance, but the sight of them made his coffee taste bitter. They stopped exactly 50 feet from his fence line, engines cutting off in unison. Doors opened simultaneously, and figures in bright yellow hazmat suits emerged, moving with mechanical precision. Clayton counted them, 12 people, all carrying identical equipment cases, all facing his property like they were studying a crime scene. But here was the strangest part. They didn't seem surprised to find him there. Instead, they began setting up their gear as if his presence had been calculated into their plan. 3 months ago, Clayton had bought this 100-acre spread outside Midland, Texas, for a price that seemed too good to be true. The previous owner, an elderly rancher named Frank Morrison, had practically begged him to take it off his hands. The land looked worthless, cracked earth, sparse vegetation, and soil so dry it turned to powder when the wind blew. But Clayton needed a fresh start after his divorce, and the isolation felt like exactly what his shattered life required. He'd sunk his entire settlement into this place, planning to run a small cattle operation and rebuild himself from the ground up. Now these people in hazmat suits were treating his property like it might explode. The team leader, distinguishable only by a red stripe on her helmet, pulled out what looked like a tablet and began taking readings near his fence. She gestured to 2 others, who immediately started assembling a device Clayton didn't recognize. It looked scientific, expensive, and completely out of place in the middle of nowhere, Texas. Clayton set down his coffee and walked toward the fence. The morning sun beat down on the yellow suits, but none of them showed any sign of discomfort. Professional, he thought. Whatever they were doing, they'd done it before. As he approached, the team leader noticed him and raised her hand. Not a greeting, but a clear signal for him to stop. "Morning," Clayton called out, trying to sound neighborly despite the growing knot in his stomach. "Y'all lost?" The woman in the red-striped helmet turned toward him, her face hidden behind a tinted visor. When she spoke, her voice came through some kind of speaker system built into her suit, giving it a mechanical quality that made Clayton's skin crawl. "Sir, I need you to maintain your current distance for your own safety." Safety from what? Clayton looked around his property with new eyes. Same dried grass, same empty pastures, same collection of rusted farm equipment he'd inherited from Morrison. Nothing that would require hazmat suits. Nothing that would bring a team of 12 specialists to his doorstep on a Tuesday morning in March. But as the team continued their work, pulling out more equipment and taking readings along his entire fence line, Clayton realized they weren't here by accident. They knew exactly what they were looking for, and whatever it was somewhere on his land. "Sir, we're conducting routine environmental testing in this area," the woman replied, her mechanical voice carrying no warmth or explanation. She gestured to her team, who had now spread across the entire eastern border of his property. "This is standard protocol following recent geological surveys." Clayton felt his chest tighten. Geological surveys? He'd bought this place specifically because it was in the middle of nowhere, far from anything that would interest geologists or environmental teams. "Nobody told me about any surveys." "This is private property. We're not on your property, sir. We're operating within the legal easement." She pointed to an invisible line that apparently ran along his fence. "However, I strongly recommend you and any family members avoid the eastern portion of your land until our assessment is complete." The eastern portion. That was where Morrison had told him never to graze cattle, claiming the soil was too poor. Clayton had assumed it was just bad farming advice from an old man who'd given up on his land years ago. But now, watching these specialists work with equipment that probably cost more than his entire property, he wondered what Morrison had really known. One of the team members called out something Clayton couldn't hear, and the leader immediately walked over to examine a device that was beeping steadily. The sound carried across the morning air like a metal detector that had found something significant. The woman studied the readings, then looked directly at Clayton's house, as if calculating something important. "What exactly are you testing for?" Clayton asked, his voice harder now. The polite small talk was over. These people were treating his land like it posed some kind of threat, and he deserved answers. "Soil composition analysis," came the mechanical reply. "Nothing that concerns the current landowner. Nothing that concerns him. It was his land. Every reading they took, every sample they collected, every beeping device they pointed at his property concerned him completely." Clayton had spent 3 years fighting lawyers during his divorce, and he recognized the careful language people used when they were hiding something important. Behind the team leader, 2 specialists had assembled what looked like a drilling rig on wheels. They positioned it exactly at the fence line and began boring into the ground. The drill bit disappeared into the earth with surprising ease, as if the soil was softer than it appeared. Clay and rock fragments emerged from the hole, but Clayton noticed something strange. Some of the fragments had an unusual metallic sheen that caught the morning sunlight. The team leader noticed his attention and moved to block his view. "Sir, I need to ask you to return to your residence. Our equipment emits radiation that could be harmful with prolonged exposure." Radiation? Clayton's blood ran cold. Morrison had lived on this land for 40 years and died peacefully in his sleep at 83. If there was radiation here, wouldn't he have shown signs of illness? Wouldn't the government have posted warnings or restricted access? Unless the radiation was new, or unless Morrison had known about it and kept it secret for reasons Clayton was just beginning to understand. The drilling rig hit something solid with a metallic clang that echoed across the pasture. The operator immediately stopped and called the team leader over. She examined the drill bit, then the hole, then picked up her tablet and began typing rapidly. Her body language had changed completely. Where before she'd seemed routine and professional, now she appeared excited, almost urgent. Clayton watched her make a phone call, turning away from him and speaking in low, intense tones. He caught fragments of words carried by the wind. "Confirmed, deeper than expected, and notify the office immediately." When she hung up, she gathered her team into a tight huddle. Whatever they'd found in that hole had just changed everything. But as Clayton stood there watching 12 specialists in hazmat suits discuss his property like they owned it, he realized the bigger question wasn't what they'd found. The question was how they'd known exactly where to look. Clayton didn't wait for permission. He walked straight to his pickup truck and drove the perimeter of his property, staying on his side of the fence line but getting close enough to see what the team was really doing. The drilling rig had punched through something hollow beneath the surface, and now they were pulling up core samples that definitely weren't typical Texas soil. The fragments they were examining had a distinct blue-green tinge, almost metallic, that caught the sunlight like polished stone. At the northwest corner of his land, Clayton discovered something that made his blood run cold. Wooden survey stakes with orange flagging tape, driven into the ground in a perfect grid pattern. The stakes were weathered, meaning they'd been there for months, maybe longer. Someone had mapped his property long before the hazmat team arrived. Someone had known exactly where to look and what they'd find when they dug. Clayton pulled out his phone and called Frank Morrison's nephew, the only family contact he'd had during the sale. The phone rang 6 times before a suspicious voice answered. "Yeah? This is Clayton Reeves. I bought your uncle's place outside Midland. I need to ask you some questions about the land." Silence stretched for nearly 30 seconds. "Uncle Frank said you might call eventually." Eventually? Clayton felt the knot in his stomach tighten. What did he mean by that? "Look, mister, Uncle Frank made me promise not to say anything unless something like this happened. Are there people on your land? People with equipment?" Clayton's mouth went dry. Morrison had known this would happen. "Yes, they're saying they're testing for contamination." "They're not testing for contamination," came the quiet reply. "They're testing for lithium deposits. Uncle Frank found them back in the 80s when he was digging a well. Biggest vein he'd ever seen, running right through the heart of his property. Problem was, he didn't have the money to extract it, and he didn't trust the companies that came sniffing around. Lithium. Clayton's mind raced. With the electric car industry exploding, lithium had become more valuable than oil. If there was a major deposit under his land, it could be worth millions, maybe tens of millions. Why didn't he mine it himself? Because the first company that approached him tried to buy the land for a fraction of its value. When he refused, they started spreading rumors about groundwater contamination, trying to force him into bankruptcy. Uncle Frank was stubborn as a mule. He buried every record of that lithium vein and waited them out. Figured someday the right person would come along, someone who could fight back. Clayton watched the hazmat team through his windshield. They weren't environmental specialists at all. They were mineral prospectors, confirming what they already knew was there. The hazmat suits, the radiation claims, the safety warnings, all theater designed to keep him away while they gathered evidence for what came next. "Who else knows about this?" Clayton asked. Uncle Frank kept copies of the geological surveys in a safe deposit box, said if anyone ever tried to steal his land, the new owner would need proof of what was really down there. Clayton felt a surge of hope. Morrison had left him weapons in this fight. Where's the box? First National Bank in Midland. Keys taped under the kitchen drawer. Third one from the left. But mister, you need to understand something. The company that's been watching this land for 40 years isn't going to give up easy. They've got lawyers, money, and patience. Uncle Frank spent his whole life keeping them at bay. As if summoned by their conversation, a black sedan pulled up behind the white vans. A man in an expensive suit got out, shook hands with the team leader, and began examining the core samples. Even from a distance, Clayton could see the satisfaction in his body language. This wasn't a random environmental inspection. This was a carefully orchestrated operation that had been planned for decades. Clayton ended the call and started his truck. He had a safe deposit box to visit and evidence to gather. But as he drove toward town, he couldn't shake the feeling that the man in the expensive suit was already planning his next move. The key was exactly where Morrison's nephew had said it would be, taped under the third kitchen drawer with medical tape that had yellowed with age. Clayton's hands shook slightly as he peeled it free. Morrison had planned this moment, knowing that someday his land would be under siege, and the new owner would need to fight for what was rightfully theirs. First National Bank in Midland was a squat brick building that had survived decades of oil booms and busts. The elderly clerk who helped Clayton access the safe deposit box moved with the careful precision of someone who'd handled countless family secrets over the years. She inserted her master key alongside Clayton's, and the steel door swung open to reveal a manila envelope thick with documents. Inside were geological surveys dating back to 1983, soil composition reports, and photographs of core samples that matched exactly what Clayton had seen the Hazmat team pulling from his land. But the most damaging document was a letter from Apex Mineral Corporation, dated just 6 months ago, offering Morrison $200,000 for land they claimed was agriculturally worthless. The letter was signed by Marcus Chen, Director of Land Acquisition. Clayton photographed every document with his phone, then noticed something else in the envelope. A business card for Elena Vasquez, environmental law attorney, with a handwritten note from Morrison. Only person I trust to fight them. She knows the whole story. Before Clayton could process what this meant, his phone rang. Unknown number. Mr. Reeves, this is Marcus Chen from Apex Mineral Corporation. I believe we need to have a conversation about your property. Clayton's grip tightened on the phone. I'm listening. Our environmental assessment team has identified serious contamination issues on your land. For your safety, and that of the surrounding community, we're prepared to make an immediate cash offer that will allow you to relocate while we handle the cleanup. The lie came so smoothly that Clayton almost admired the audacity. How much? $250,000. Cash. Closing within 48 hours. Clayton did the math in his head. For worthless contaminated land, that was generous. For land sitting on top of a lithium vein worth potentially $50 million, it was highway robbery. And if I refuse? Mr. Reeves, I hope you understand the liability you're facing. If contamination spreads to neighboring properties, or if someone becomes ill from exposure, you could face lawsuits that would bankrupt you 10 times over. We're offering you a way out. There it was. The same play they'd tried on Morrison 40 years ago. Create fear, apply pressure, make the victim grateful to escape with anything. I need time to think about it. Of course, but our environmental team will need to expand their assessment area tomorrow. For safety reasons, we'll require you to vacate the premises temporarily while we work. Clayton felt his temper flare. You can't force me off my own land. Actually, Mr. Reeves, we can. Emergency environmental protocols allow for temporary displacement when contamination poses an immediate health risk. I'm sure you wouldn't want to interfere with protecting public safety. The call ended before Clayton could respond. Chen wasn't negotiating. He was delivering an ultimatum disguised as an offer. They'd found their lithium, confirmed its value, and now they were moving to phase 2. Legal intimidation backed by manufactured environmental concerns. Clayton immediately called Elena Vasquez. Her voice was crisp, professional, and unsurprised when he explained the situation. Frank Morrison hired me 3 years ago to prepare for this exact scenario, she said. He knew they'd eventually make their move, and he wanted to make sure whoever bought his land had legal representation ready to go. Can you meet me at my office in 2 hours? They're threatening to force me off my land tomorrow. Not if we file an emergency injunction first. Mr. Reeves, these people have been patient for 40 years, but patience has made them careless. They've left a paper trail that proves they knew about the lithium deposits before they ever claimed environmental contamination. We're going to use their own documentation to destroy them." As Clayton drove back toward his property, he saw that the black sedan was gone, but the white vans remained. The Hazmat team was working with increased urgency now, extracting more core samples and taking readings across a wider area. They knew time was running short. Tomorrow they'd try to force him out, but tonight belonged to him. Clayton parked his truck and walked toward the fence line, no longer intimidated by their equipment or their warnings. For the first time since the yellow suits had appeared on his land, he felt like he might actually have a chance to win this fight. Elena Vasquez's law office occupied the second floor of a renovated Victorian house in downtown Midland, and the moment Clayton walked through her door, he understood why Morrison had trusted her. She was sharp, direct, and had the files of his case already spread across her conference table like she'd been preparing for war. "Frank Morrison hired me specifically for this day," she said without preamble, gesturing for Clayton to sit. He knew Apex would eventually make their move, and he wanted to make sure whoever inherited his fight had the ammunition to win it. Clayton examined the documents she'd assembled: geological surveys, environmental impact reports, and most damning of all, internal Apex memos dating back to 1987 that discussed the lithium deposits in explicit detail. The company had known about the mineral wealth for nearly 40 years and had been systematically trying to acquire the land through legal manipulation. "How did Morrison get these internal memos?" Clayton asked. One of Apex's geologists had a crisis of conscience in 2019. Dr. Sarah Mitchell had been part of the original survey team and couldn't stomach watching them destroy families for decades. She leaked everything to Frank before she died of cancer last year. Elena pulled up a specific document on her tablet. "This is the smoking gun," an email chain from Marcus Chen to Apex's legal department, discussing how to manufacture environmental violations that would force landowners into emergency sales. They've done this to 12 families in Texas alone. Clayton felt his anger rising. 12 families? All sitting on valuable mineral deposits. All driven off their land by fake contamination claims. All compensated at a fraction of their land's true value. Elena leaned forward. "But you're different, Clayton. Morrison made sure you'd have evidence they can't suppress or explain away." Before Clayton could respond, Elena's phone rang. She glanced at the screen and frowned. "It's the county environmental office. This can't be good." She answered with professional calm. "Elena Vasquez speaking." Clayton watched her expression darken as she listened. "I understand. Yes, we'll comply with the inspection, but I'm filing an emergency motion to require independent verification of all findings." She hung up and looked at Clayton with concern. "They've escalated faster than I expected. The county received an anonymous tip about hazardous materials on your property. Environmental Services is required to conduct an emergency inspection tomorrow morning, and if they find evidence of contamination, they can issue an immediate evacuation order." "Anonymous tip?" Clayton's voice was bitter. "Let me guess. Marcus Chen works fast, but he's also made a critical mistake." Elena pulled up another document. Frank Morrison had annual soil and water tests conducted by an independent lab every year for the past decade. Clean results every time. If Apex's inspection finds contamination that wasn't there 6 months ago, we can prove they planted it. Clayton stood and walked to the window. Below, Midland's main street was quiet in the evening light, but he could see a black sedan parked across from the law office. The same model he'd seen at his property that morning. "They're watching us." Elena joined him at the window. "Of course they are. 40 years of patience doesn't make them careless, but it does make them predictable. They're following the same playbook they used on Morrison and the 11 families before you. What's our next move? We file an emergency injunction tonight, requiring any environmental testing to be conducted by a court-appointed independent laboratory. Not Apex's people. We also demand immediate access to all of Apex's geological surveys of your property, which they'll have to provide under discovery laws." Elena gathered the documents into a thick folder and handed it to Clayton. "Take this home and read everything. Tomorrow morning you're going to face people who will try to intimidate you into signing away millions of dollars. I need you to understand exactly what you're fighting for, and exactly what weapons we have." As Clayton reached for the folder, Elena grabbed his wrist. "Clayton, these people have spent 4 decades perfecting the art of stealing land through legal manipulation. They're not going to walk away just because we have paperwork. Tomorrow is going to be the hardest day of your life. Clayton looked down at the black sedan, still parked and waiting. The man behind the wheel was watching the law office entrance through binoculars. They weren't even trying to hide their surveillance anymore. The gloves were coming off, and tomorrow would determine whether he kept his land or lost everything to a corporation that had been patient enough to wait 40 years for this moment. Clayton drove home through the Texas evening with Elena's folder on his passenger seat, but he wasn't alone on the road. The black sedan followed him at a discreet distance, joined by a white pickup truck that had appeared from nowhere as he left downtown Midland. They were no longer hiding their surveillance. They wanted him to know he was being watched. When Clayton reached his property, he discovered the situation had changed dramatically. The white vans were gone, but they'd been replaced by a mobile laboratory that looked like something from a hazardous waste cleanup site. Bright floodlights illuminated his entire eastern pasture, and workers in full protective gear were drilling multiple test holes across an area the size of a football field. Clayton parked and walked toward the fence line, but this time he was stopped by a security guard wearing a badge from Titan Protection Services. The man was professional but firm. "Sir, this area is under environmental quarantine. I can't allow you to approach the testing site. This is my property." "Yes, sir, I understand your frustration, but emergency protocols are in effect. For your safety and the safety of our crew, I need to ask you to maintain a distance of at least 100 feet. Clayton looked past the guard at the operation. They weren't just taking soil samples anymore. They were systematically excavating the entire area where the lithium deposits lay hidden, removing evidence of what was really buried there. Every shovelful of earth they took was another piece of his future being stolen. His phone rang. Elena Vasquez, calling with news that made his blood run cold. "Clayton, we have a problem. I just received a fax from the county. They're moving faster than I anticipated. Emergency Environmental Services will be at your property at 6 a.m. tomorrow to conduct their own assessment. If they confirm contamination, you'll have 24 hours to vacate permanently. Can they do that?" "Legally, yes. If hazardous materials pose an immediate threat to public safety, property owners can be forced to relocate while cleanup occurs. The process can take years, during which time the property typically gets sold to cover cleanup costs." Clayton watched the floodlit excavation continue. "They're not testing for contamination, Elena. They're mining my lithium right now tonight before anyone can stop them." Silence on the other end of the line. "Are you certain? They've got industrial equipment out here. They're not taking samples. They're taking everything." Clayton felt rage building in his chest. 40 years of patience, and now they're just stealing it in plain sight. Document everything. Take photos, video, anything that shows what they're actually doing. If we can prove they're extracting minerals while claiming environmental testing, we can destroy them in court. Clayton started recording with his phone, but the security guard immediately stepped forward. "Sir, no photography of the remediation site is permitted. Proprietary cleanup methods, you understand. Proprietary cleanup methods." Clayton almost laughed at the audacity. They were stealing millions of dollars worth of lithium deposits and calling it environmental protection. But as he watched the operation, he realized something that chilled him to the bone. This wasn't a desperate last-minute grab. This was a precisely planned operation that had been prepared years in advance. The mobile laboratory, the security team, the excavation equipment, none of this had been assembled overnight. Apex had been ready to move the moment their environmental claims were accepted. They'd probably been practicing this exact operation on other properties, perfecting their theft until it looked like legitimate remediation work. Clayton's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Mr. Reeves, this is your final opportunity to accept our generous offer. After tomorrow morning's environmental assessment, our offer will be withdrawn permanently. You have until midnight to decide. Marcus Chen." Clayton looked at his watch. It was nearly 10 p.m. Chen was giving him 2 hours to surrender everything he owned, or face whatever they planned to claim they'd found in their rigged environmental assessment. 2 hours to choose between taking their money and fighting a battle he might not win. But as Clayton observed them strip his land bare under the harsh floodlights, he realized they'd made one crucial mistake. They were so confident in their legal manipulation that they'd revealed their hand completely. Tomorrow morning, when the county environmental team arrived, they wouldn't find contamination. They'd find evidence of unauthorized mineral extraction conducted under false pretenses. Clayton smiled grimly and started walking back to his house. Chen had given him until midnight to decide, but Clayton had already made his choice. Tomorrow, He was going to war. Clayton didn't sleep that night. Instead, he spent the hours before dawn documenting everything from his house with a telephoto camera lens he'd bought years ago for wildlife photography. The floodlit operation continued until 4 a.m., when the excavation crews finally stopped and loaded trucks with what looked like tons of mineral-rich soil. By the time they finished, they'd stripped away the entire lithium vein that Morrison had discovered in the 80s. At exactly 6 a.m., 2 county environmental vehicles arrived, followed immediately by Marcus Chen in his black sedan. Clayton observed through his living room window as Chen spoke privately with the county inspector for several minutes before the official assessment began. Money changed hands. Clayton was certain of it. Elena Vasquez arrived 15 minutes later with a court-appointed independent environmental specialist named Dr. James Wright, a man who'd been conducting soil assessments in Texas for 30 years. Clayton met them at his front door with a flash drive containing every photo and video he'd taken during the night. "They mined it," Clayton said without preamble. "Spent all night extracting the lithium and loading it onto trucks. If there's contamination found this morning, they planted it." Elena reviewed the photos on her tablet, while Dr. Wright examined the excavation site through binoculars. The independent specialist's expression grew increasingly grim as he studied the scene. "This isn't environmental testing," Dr. Wright said. "This is systematic mineral extraction disguised as remediation work. Look at the excavation patterns, the equipment they used, the way they processed and removed the soil." They knew exactly what they were looking for and where to find it. The county inspector emerged from the excavation site carrying soil samples and immediately declared the area contaminated with heavy metals at dangerous levels. Chen stepped forward with evacuation paperwork already prepared, requiring Clayton to vacate within 24 hours. "I'm afraid the contamination is severe," the inspector announced. "Immediate evacuation is required for public safety." Elena stepped forward with legal documents of her own. "We're filing an emergency injunction requiring independent verification of all soil samples. Dr. Wright will conduct parallel testing to confirm or refute these findings." Chen's confident expression flickered for the first time. "That's unnecessary. Our certified laboratory has already confirmed the results." "Your certified laboratory," Dr. Wright replied. "That happens to be owned by Apex Mineral Corporation through a shell company. I've been researching your operation all morning, Mr. Chen. Apex Environmental Services isn't an independent lab. It's your in-house testing facility." Clayton watched Chen's face as the reality hit him. They'd been using their own laboratory to manufacture contamination evidence for 40 years, but they'd never faced someone who bothered to investigate the ownership structure of their testing company. Helena handed the county inspector a thick legal document. "This is a federal lawsuit against Apex Mineral Corporation for fraudulent environmental claims, illegal mineral extraction, and conspiracy to commit land theft across multiple states. The FBI has been contacted and is en route." Chen pulled out his phone and made a hurried call, but Clayton could see the panic in his movements. 40 years of careful legal manipulation had just collapsed in a single morning because they'd gotten too confident and too greedy. Dr. Wright collected soil samples from areas untouched by the overnight mining operation and sealed them in official containers. "I'll have independent lab results within 48 hours. If contamination exists only in the areas where Apex conducted their extraction, we'll have definitive proof of evidence tampering." Clayton stood on his property watching Marcus Chen drive away in defeat, leaving behind his excavation equipment and his mobile laboratory as evidence of their crimes. For the first time since the hazmat suits had appeared on his land, Clayton felt like he might actually win this fight. 48 hours later, Dr. Wright's independent laboratory results confirmed what Clayton had known all along. The soil samples from undisturbed areas of his property showed no contamination whatsoever, while the areas where Apex had conducted their overnight mining operation tested positive for heavy metals that had clearly been introduced artificially. The evidence was so obvious that even Apex's own lawyers advised immediate settlement. Marcus Chen was arrested by federal agents on charges of fraud, conspiracy, and theft of mineral resources across multiple states. The FBI investigation revealed that Apex had stolen an estimated $200 million worth of lithium, rare earth minerals, and oil deposits from families across Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona over 4 decades. 12 families who'd lost their land to fake environmental claims would finally receive justice. Elena Vasquez called Clayton with the final settlement details on a sunny Thursday morning in April. Apex is paying full restitution for the lithium they extracted, plus punitive damages for attempted theft. The total settlement is $8.5 million. Clayton sat on his front porch, looking out at the pasture where the white vans had first appeared 6 months ago. The excavation scars had healed over with new grass, and he'd finally bought the cattle he'd originally planned to raise. 20 head of Angus beef cattle grazed peacefully, where Apex had tried to steal his future. "What about the remaining lithium deposits?" Clayton asked. "Still yours. Morrison's geological surveys show the vein extends much deeper than what they managed to extract. Conservative estimates put the remaining value at over $50 million. You can mine it yourself, lease the rights to a legitimate company, or just sit on it as long-term security." Clayton smiled, thinking about Frank Morrison's 40-year fight to protect this land. The old rancher had known this day would come, and had prepared weapons for a battle he wouldn't live to see. Morrison's patience and determination had finally paid off. Just not for him. "There's one more thing," Elena continued. "The state attorney general wants to award you a civilian commendation for exposing the Apex conspiracy. Your evidence helped break open the biggest mining fraud in Texas history." After ending the call, Clayton walked out to check on his cattle. The Angus bull he'd named Frank looked up from grazing and watched him approach. Clayton had learned something about patience from Morrison's legacy. Sometimes the most valuable things in life were worth waiting for, worth fighting for, and worth protecting at all costs. His phone buzzed with a text from his ex-wife, congratulating him on the news coverage of his legal victory. She'd seen the story on national television and wanted to know if he'd consider reconciling. Clayton deleted the message without responding. Some chapters of life deserved to stay closed. As the sun set over his 100 acres of Texas rangeland, Clayton Reeves stood as a different man than the one who'd bought dead land 6 months ago. He'd transformed from a divorced refugee seeking isolation into someone who'd stood up to corporate giants and won. The land had changed him, taught him to fight, and rewarded him with prosperity beyond his wildest dreams. The hazmat suits were gone, the white vans were history, and Marcus Chen was facing 20 years in federal prison. Clayton owned his land completely, held title to one of the largest lithium deposits in North America, and had enough money in the bank to live however he chose. He'd thought he'd bought dead land, but he'd actually purchased his future, his courage, and his identity as a man who couldn't be intimidated or cheated. Frank Morrison would have been proud. If you enjoyed this story, click the video on your screen now to watch another unforgettable story where ordinary people face extraordinary challenges and discover the strength they never knew they had. Don't forget to subscribe and consider a super chat to help us keep bringing you more stories like these. Your support means everything to us.